Welcome to Fungi Frontiers, the official podcast of the Maine Fungi Fest, where we'll celebrate all things fungi, plant-based healing, and evolving consciousness. Yes, welcome one and all to the very first episode, and I'm your host, Bobby Paluzzi. Today, very fittingly, Sean P. O'Donoghue, an herbalist, I get to interview. We're going to ask him about his personal relationship to mushrooms and his concept of the consciousness of things. That is to say, the consciousness of forms of life. It's fascinating. He's fascinating. And we're going to start talking about that in a moment's time.
One of the greatest and most dangerous delusions of our culture is the idea of the uniqueness and specialness of human consciousness.
Sean P. O'Donoghue, I'd like you to give me your title if you have one.
I'm not sure I do. I'm an herbalist. Yes.
Okay, so could you please explain your relationship to mushrooms at this time?
The fungal world helps us understand so much of where we came from. Our own individual nervous systems are localized variations on a mycorrhizal network. And it was the mycelia of that network that formed the basis for our neurons and our synapses, formed the evolutionary model. And so I relate to mushrooms profoundly as our ancestors and as our distant kin. And also because I think that they help us to understand a little bit more about different ways of being in the world. So we look at a mushroom and we think of it as an individual, but it is an individual. Each mushroom has a different experience than any other mushroom has ever had before or will ever have again. Yes,
It's going to be different than another one located in somewhere else, right?
exactly.
Okay.
And yet they're part of a larger organism.
Does the larger organism have a consciousness of its own that is able to produce and adapt into these different environments?
It does, precisely.
Okay.
And so the mushroom's having its individual experience at the same time that that's feeding into the collective experience of that whole mycelial organism.
This is the key of your wonderful insight, is the human capacity to get closer to the guidance of the mushroom.
Right.
By using it, and also just by being more aware of it.
So I'll need to go on a slight tangent first to have it all make sense,
Do it.
which is a lot of scholars who look at indigenous worldviews versus our contemporary Western worldview say that one of the fundamental differences is that in our culture, the first layer of being is I. We think of ourselves as primarily and often as strictly individual. Whereas in indigenous cultures, the first layer of being is we. It's not that there's not that there's not an I, but that I is primarily understood as part of a we, or as part of multiple we's, as part of a family, as part of a tribe, as a tribe's collection.
And they recognize the roles they're in. They recognize their roles. Yeah.
And so, exactly. So in that way, like, original human consciousness is much closer in its form to mushroom consciousness. But then we look back at when did humans first start coming into contact with psilocybin, with psilocybe mushrooms on a regular basis, was when they started creating clearings to graze cattle and sheep. And in those grasslands, the mushrooms grow. And we could think of it as living intelligence of the earth was reaching out to us and say, hey, now that you're beginning to treat yourselves as more separate, you need to go back and remember that togetherness. And so the mushrooms come into relationship with us in a way that helps us to do that,
Are the
just as
far
long before humans existed.
are the farms, you saying the farms are making people less tribal and more, what, more like spread into sort of like little nuclear family um, areas that they weren't as communing all to one another in the way that a tribe does?
At the point that I was just talking about, it was still very much a tribal existence and tribal understanding, but it was creating a separation between the human and the wild and altering the landscape in a different way than people had before. And then we have across history, but in a very strong way, about 500 years ago, when both in Europe and in the colonization of the Americas and in the kidnapping of people from Africa, there was separation of people from community and land. So that begins to move more, towards more individual. And then that gets really, really hyper accelerated in the 20th century. But it's really interesting that at the point that humans detonate the first nuclear bomb, within it's within a few years of when our culture comes back into contact with philosophy, and when Albert Hoffman, working with the claviceps fungus, extracts LSD. And so it's like at these crucial moments in our development when we're moving further away from the course of the rest of life,
Seems like
these organisms come and meet us.
a lot of things turned over right around that atomic age, and we gained a lot of potential for awareness right around then. Okay, people say that mushroom therapy can repair, and that sounds like a guidance to me, like repair people from illnesses, psychological illnesses, neurological illnesses. And this kind of thing says, all right, that consciousness can be accepted by humans and passively allowed to kind of like work on you, maybe adhere to its call. So
Yeah, I mean, in
yeah,
some ways, Timothy Leary had it pretty right and succinctly when he said, turn on, tune in, drop out. Although maybe it would be turn on, tune in, drop in if we're
yeah,
talking about dropping in to the,
I think the
yeah,
last part of that was always the key kicker for someone with drop out. Wait a minute.
yeah.
Yeah, so where do I go from there? There's nowhere after out. Um, but yeah, I think there's something to it. You do have to drop out of a certain aspect of thinking, any kind of rigidity that you were. Do you see something with intuition and the idea of following the again, I just want to keep going on with, because you have this insight, you seem to know that the mushroom is a guide, some kind of a way that we can recognize what we're able to, supposed to be aware of.
Yeah, well, I would say that all of the psilocybe mushrooms
What is
serve
that
this
word?
role. So the ones that produce psilocybin.
Okay,
So
then.
all the mushrooms that produce psilocybin
Okay.
are serving a role within their ecosystem of helping to facilitate interweaving and connection. And so they do the same for us when we come into contact with them, just as they did for other beings long before us, and just as they will for other beings long after us. And so they're really good.
Which beings before us?
Pretty much every species that encounter, for example, that trees have serotonergic systems, and so trees dream too.
Uh, uh,
They
do
have system they
what's a
have systems that are based on serotonin
what is a
and
dream of a tree like?
long
What do
and
you
slow.
what do you what are you thinking? Like what consciousness does a tree inhabit? I'm getting closer to a mushroom if I can get to a tree maybe, because we have a lot of exposure with trees. So what does a tree dream about? or of or with, or how
Yeah.
does it dream? How does it dream?
Yeah. Yeah. The with is a wonderful word, the dreaming with, because they're
Mm,
dreaming with each other and they're
mm,
dreaming with
mm,
the whole of the forest.
mm-hmm,
And one of the things about a tree is that because they are there for often for centuries, or at least they evolved to be able to
mm-hmm,
live for centuries, they are memory keepers and they focus a lot on what's happening in one place over a long period of time. And it's interesting because their roots
mm,
intertwine with with the mycelium of the fungi. And the
mm,
fungi are all about what's happening over a vast distance in a single moment.
mm.
So together, the the mycelial mind is the vast horizontal mind that's conceiving of everything happening in an instant across a wide area. And the tree
Ah,
mind is the very concentrated, deep mind that goes into everything that's happened in one place over a long period of time, but
interesting.
doesn't
Okay,
imagine beyond that place,
I
except
see.
to the degree that it's informed by what's flowing in from that network. And there are even fungi in deserts. I mean, not as abundant, but I'm not certain if there's fungal life in Antarctica. But pretty much in all of the terrestrial world, there's fungal life. But I do tend to be land-based rather than water-based.
Ah, let's take a nice pause. And thanks again for joining us on the very first episode of Fungi Frontiers. This podcast is brought to you on behalf of the Maine Fungi Fest, May 30th through June 1st, 2025, at St. Joseph's College in Maine, where we encourage those now interested in participating to please visit www.mainefungifest.org for more of those details. Let's get back to our lively and provocative discussion, philosophically and, I want to say, metafungally, about his first episodes with psychedelics.
It took me a long time to articulate it and identify it when I was 19 and had my first experience taking psilocybin in the forest and felt as though I first understood what it was like to be a deer in the forest, grazing on the buds of the trees. I felt my mind go down through the roots and I felt it go into something else. And that something else was the mind of the forest. It was that mycorrhizal network. I think the primary thing is curiosity. And the the great mycologist Merlin Sheldrake speaks about this in his book Entangled Life, where he talks about how the mycelium puts itself inside its food and begins to digest it from within and assimilate it and experience it. And then its curiosity to discover more leads it to branch out further. And it keeps branching and branching. And what's interesting is our own brains have that same capacity. And when we're under the influence of psilocybin or of LSD, which is also a compound initially,
Hmm.
um, we then actually end up having our own brains creating more branching synapses in a way that's more similar to what's happening in a mycelial organism.
Are we talking about meditation? Is that what you do to get to a place where you're connecting, or is it just an everyday thing with your after a while?
It's both. It becomes an everyday thing.
Okay.
And there are lots of different forms of meditation that can bring people there. But I find that for me, the one that that has brought me there most deeply has been one I learned from my late friend Stephen Buhner and his partner Julie McIntyre, which is to bring your awareness to feeling your heartbeat and then to bring gratitude to your heartbeat
Hmm.
and stay with that for longer and longer. And then once you've learned to stay in that place, from that place going out and encountering the world. And often a tree is a good place to begin that encounter.
So a rhythm, did you just say? A rhythm?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
the rhythm
Uh-huh.
of your heartbeat,
Uh-huh.
bringing your
Uh-huh.
attention to the
Uh-huh.
rhythm of your heartbeat
Uh-huh.
and bringing gratitude toward it, because that refocuses how we're prioritizing what's coming in from the world. And our hearts have these very sensitive electromagnetic fields that are feeling all the fluctuations and everything, because everything that's alive has a different electromagnetic signature. That heart field is changed, and then that travels to our brains as a kind of sensory information. But it's a kind of sensory information that is sort of the feeling sense of things, in the same way that our eyes take in light and then we perceive it in terms of color and shape. Our ears take in sound and we perceive it in terms of pitch and volume. When our hearts take in what's happening in the world, we perceive it as the emotional sense of what's around us and that felt sense of what we're encountering. So, like when you walk into a room and
Hmm.
without looking at
Hmm.
people's faces or
Hmm.
hearing them speak, you can tell sort of the mood and the feeling of the room. That's that sense kicking in.
Okay, close your eyes, open your heart if possible, and
Exactly.
maybe be in a safe enough place to allow that. Which also, if you think about it, mushrooms do seem to be need to be in the right condition,
Yeah.
to at least expose to the outside world and grow. So finding that place is a wonderful thing for human beings. And Fungi Frontiers here is this is a perfect interview for us because we're trying to make that match and get that consciousness that you're talking about that's out there into the human set mindset and make it more of an everyday thing to the point where it really is a wonderful mingling. And what benefits do you think, in a just now very idealistic overall way, would such a thing to happen, were such a thing to happen on a large scale and in a very accepting way? Do you think that that would possibly occur?
Well, it's interesting. So it's like we have public health officials beginning to talk about loneliness as a health crisis. And they're right, but they're only onto part of it because the loneliness for human connection is real. It is a crisis in our culture. But we also have a deeper loneliness. That's a loneliness for the connection with the rest of life, a loneliness for remembering what we're part of, for understanding that we're part of that evolutionary dance. And when we come into this experience of direct contact with the living world, that the mushrooms are not the only path to, but can be a profound path to help us enter into, then that loneliness begins to abate. And we become not only individually healthier, but also collectively healthier. We become more able to fluidly respond to what life wants and needs.
Say something one more time about this loneliness.
Yeah. Well, if we think about our oldest ancestors, in every moment of their life, they were experiencing life in some form, whether it was hearing the calls of birds or the howl of a wolf or hearing the wind in the trees, breathing in the exhalations of plants, or tasting in the water things that pass through the roots of the plants around them. Uh, they were constantly in contact with a living world that uh, was shaping their reality. And so uh, we evolved toward that kind of deep kinship with everything. And the more we've become separated from it, the more we become separated from ourselves and from each other. And so that ecological loneliness is of all of our other kinds of loneliness.
Hmm.
And the good news is that we have the same nervous systems that our ancestors had. So they've just been exposed to different things. And so we have the capacity to reconnect with them. And I think about Terence McKenna famously said, nature is alive and is always speaking to us. And this is
Nice.
not a metaphor. And I always laugh because people try to figure out, well, what is he trying to say? It's like, well, he was trying to say exactly what he said. That's why
Yeah.
I said this is
Yeah,
not a
that's it.
metaphor.
That's it. Well, it's funny. As I'm, asking you these questions, I say, wow, it sounds so profound, but I really liked one of your answers, which was, it's an everyday thing as well as a highly, aware state and something rare. It becomes an everyday thing. And this sounds like an achievement that we could be aiming for. And I love that you were able to come on and represent that with us here. Did uh, did there was there some news that you had? Something new coming out from you?
I just had a new book come out this summer, The Silver Branch and the Other World, where I delve into this way of looking. Actually,
Silver
the
Silver
Silver, Br
Branch, the Silver Branch and the Other World?
yes,
All right. Just wanted to get that right. The Silver Branch and
yeah,
the Other World, and your name is Sean P. O'Donohue. I can look that up if I'm listening. So
okay.
please tell me a little more about it.
Yeah. So, in the ancient Irish understanding of this world, there was this world that we live in, and there was the other world that was not separate. It was close. It was an inner dimension of everything. It was always touching on us, like what we think of as the spirit world, um, but that people had lost daily contact with. And the Irish sea god, Manannán mac Lir, the son of the great sea of being, would sometimes come to a human and bring a silver branch of an apple tree that had flowers and fruit and leaves on it at the same time, because it was from that deeper, came from a world where there was that deeper understanding of unity. And when they held it, they could see the deep inner dimensions of everything.
Hmm.
And so
Very
that to me
nice.
becomes a metaphor for our entering into that, remembering that everything is alive. And so the book is an exploration of that.
Oh, wow. Wow, I'd love to explore it. Is there some story or something about Fungi Fest that you can add to our interview here that from the main Fungi Fest?
Well, I think that one of the things I love about Funky Fest is we have all these people who are wildly differently individual coming together, united by their common love of or curiosity about the fungal world. And then over the course of a few days, become woven into a collective where we're all sharing in deeper degrees of understanding.
I think that's splendid. Okay, I've had a great time interviewing Sean. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back, listeners, from our interview with Sean. I hope you thought it was more than worthy and gave you something to explore. Fungi Frontiers is brought to you by Moving On Productions and the Maine Consciousness Healing and Living Medicine Project. We're going to have our Maine Fungi Fest on the shores of Sebago Lake, May 30th through Sunday, June 1st, 2025, at St. Joseph's College in Maine this year. Oh my. We're going to tap into Fungi Fests across the country as they are growing in popularity, and the whole subject matter itself is becoming wider and reaching more and more people in more and more ways. Head to www.mainefungifest.org for more. I'm Bobby Paluzzi. I'm thanking you so much for coming this far with me on this very first broadcast. And don't forget to stay connected. Until next time, as we further our fungi frontiers.